gonna.
Okay.
Oh,
completely disagree with that.
I'll just let you
Take it away.
say your opinion, and then we're gonna go to the game.
Pool,
But go
I don't
ahead.
think the courtyard pool is that big because we've seen teams do bigger pools into Soulbound Goliath. Also, I don't think I kind of hesitate to just say they're going for the high risk, high reward strategies. I think they're only high risk because of their level of practice at this point. But we are already into the King's Rest, so let's get into that right now.
Not a problem. I like this kind of
You're on the
conversation.
floor, man. It's all good.
Yeah, but I want to watch these teams invis to the first room. This is exciting. Let's go.
I know,
Go
right?
away, Zyro.
As much as this like drives me insane seeing an invis potion used at the very beginning, it makes sense. But Eric already going down off the pulse, so you need to make sure to get a quick res on him so they can get this ball rolling. NA already starting up with their massive pull as they grab everything in the Golden Serpent's room up together. Huge damage going out onto Lighty, but he has stabilized quite well. You just look at his defensive bar, and every single button's been used.
Yeah, literally everything on cooldown. So he's just going to get out of dodge completely. Of course, that Necrotic affix makes it so he really doesn't want to tank in there. He has to reset his debuff, which he has at this point, so he can go ahead and go back in with just the few remaining mobs. Of course, after they've been soothed by those hunter pets as well. Of course, Max doing the same thing on his side now, just completely getting out. He's not going to go down to the Quaking because, of course, it doesn't do damage to just yourself anymore. If that wasn't changed, he'd be a dead man. Definitely scary pulls up right off the bat here, but it looks like both teams are going to be able to deal with it relatively clean.
Yeah, and that's really what it's all about, is the tanks having the presence of mind of how long can they stay in there before they need to just get out of dodge and make sure that they line of sight the mobs that are casting on them, or just make sure they're in line of sight for the healer. You know, knowing the situation, knowing how much you can sustain yourself is always an absolute key importance. And even though we did see Method NA start a little bit earlier, Complexity Limit's not far behind, as they're again following the same cookie cutter strategy that we've seen a number of times from these guilds.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to remember, like, the players from both of these teams, they know each other really well. 3 of the players on Method NA are Complexity Limit Raiders, so these guys kind of have time to scout each other out. They talk during raid about what they're doing, so they really kind of know what the other team is really good at. So this is going to be really close just in sort of that aspect as well. But you have to remember, this is a big uphill battle for Complexity Limit. They are kind of the newer team to this, and just based off of time trial times as well, Method NA has a much, much faster time in this dungeon. And when we asked them about what it was that made them so fast, they were kind of surprised. They were perplexed, like, we just played the dungeon really well. That's all they said they did.
We played the game.
Yeah, they just played the dungeon really well. That's all they said. It's like, well, you definitely did something more than that, because you absolutely trashed everyone else's time by over 2 minutes. So let's just see what it is they did here. Again, I'm kind of surprised. I want to see if they're going to get even close to their time trial time, which was a 17:41, which is pretty fast for King's Rest. It's one of the more impressive times I think we've seen in time trials.
Without a doubt. And we did see a 1930 run earlier in the tournament, though. They had a couple deaths. They had 3 obelisks with the last boss. So there's a little bit there. I'm not sure if they just grabbed one obelisk just to say, okay, we'll wait for that extra time. Ooh, Lighty getting clobbered as he was channeling the Merecthus Fang, but the damage, though, well worth it.
Yeah, and now we're seeing them go back just now to deal with those minions of Zul. We saw that death from Eric earlier on in the dungeon. I'm pretty sure that was him dealing with those minions of Zul before they went into the actual first boss room pulse. They don't have to deal with, they don't have to worry about them at all. JB just now dealing with that as well, but he's not going to end up going down because they did deal with the first 2 of those animated guardians. Oh, and you can see that just now the rest of the minions of Zul will be, joining the rest of the group for them right now as they get on with the rest of the trash. And Twisted doing it as well. There were a couple minions as well for them as well, so I wonder.
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. JB purposely got feared so that he wouldn't be fixated by the mobs, and the fixates would gravitate towards the other players, and then he would be, unencumbered, as he went to go fight the rest of the golems and bring them all in. So I like that a lot. It was, at first I was like, oh my gosh, like, why did he get feared? Like, why didn't he avoid it or something like that? And I was like, wait.
Did it on purpose? Wait a minute.
Just like the simulations.
Big brain. But because of the way they pulled it, because they had to wait for Eric's death and res at the start of the dungeon, they're just behind that res time plus death time as well. So they're probably a solid, let's say 15 to 20 seconds or so behind. And you can see that just based off of this gauntlet right now. Of course, everything is on a fixed timer here as well. Once you kill a trash pack, you have to wait 10-15 seconds for the next part of the gauntlet to spawn here. So they're going to be, Method and A on their side is going to be probably that 15-20 seconds fixed time ahead throughout this entire gauntlet portion of the dungeon.
That's right, and it's tough to be able to make up that extra time in this area specifically. So I think Machimba's room will definitely be the first of a couple breakpoints that you have to watch for, right? I think it's tough to, bless you, it's tough to be able to find those right situations where you'll be able to make up lost ground. I mean, we saw it in Toldagor with the Ethical series, where every single time they did the cannons just a bit faster than scripted content, they made up a little bit of ground, right? It's not always as easy to see whenever we're, watching different dungeons, but those are just some of the examples of the pulls that need to happen, the execution that needs to happen in order to gain up that lost ground.
Yeah, and like we mentioned already, I'm not really sure. They're going to have to go for something crazy or just somehow have much higher level of execution, because as we know, like we already mentioned from the time trials, Method and it kind of seems like they've already got everything down pat just from the time trial time. So we have no reason to believe that they would, mess it up horribly in tournament play. We haven't seen them really mess up stuff in tournament play horribly in a very long time, I feel like.
Yeah, and that's one of the big, cues to the team and the skill and experience that kind of comes with it. And I'm always very interested to look at how teams start growing, developing versus the ones who have been around for such a long time. And just like with Live Keys, you'll see teams who've been around together since early on in the expansion. They've been around for multiple seasons playing together, and how much teams just grow exponentially over time. So very well played by Method NA just to be continuing on throughout this. Complexity limit, though, they need a bit of damage onto these mobs, but they're not terribly far behind.
Yeah, and I'm actually kind of interested to see. I'm surprised to see them pull the obelisk here on the side of Method and A. This is not something that I would have expected them to do, because we saw from the European region last week, they went for the 4 obelisk pull, and that was even on Tyrannical. I wonder if it's just got to be the Necrotic that makes it a factor for the final boss, that you don't want to pull 4 Guardians. I feel like it's probably something that's doable. It just increases the dangerousness of that pull by a lot. And of course, we're seeing Complexity Limit go for the same strategy, also pulling that obelisk as well.
I think it becomes a big challenge, especially when Raban ends up spawning throughout the final boss. Just being able to maintain aggro on that while you're running for your life to drop Necrotic stacks and deal with Tank Buster, as well as all of the other mobs that are running around all over the place. Because even if you're having the Hunters taunting every single time, they're still going to be getting aggro back onto that. You only have so many taunts at your disposal, and if you're running away from, for Raban, for example, you're running away from the boss, maintaining threat might be more of an issue, especially when you have to consider being in melee for Necrotic and you only have 1 reset.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a scary moment. Now yeah. You can see that yeah, and that's pretty true, and that's pretty true. But yeah, the first coffins have gone out, broken out of the sarcophagus for the side of Method and A. Of course, once that's happened, they can then engage the boss, because they'll be able to finish off those constructs before they do their next entombs. Ooh, not quite actually. That entomb just okay, if they were able to feign death or shot him held it off. That could have been scary if the entombs actually went off for them there, but they're able to avoid it just barely.
Doing quite a good job in Complexity Limit. This is where we wanted to start seeing them gain that ground. They're not far behind in terms of boss DPS, but it's always important to look at how much trash is left remaining, as they still have some of those constructs that they're chipping away at. They didn't focus them as quickly as we saw Method NA do.
They definitely didn't focus them down pretty much at all, and it looks like this Entomb cast might get off here. Didn't see if it did go off, but they instantly broke him out. Since there's only 1 alive, it's not really that big of a danger. You can just instantly break them out, like you're seeing them do just now. And no big deal for them. I don't want to say because they didn't focus them down, they actually ended up saving a lot of time. They were about 20 seconds behind for that entire gauntlet portion, and now they're only 5 or 6% behind on this Fortified boss. Yeah,
they're at a point where they can start catching up, and they're at a much more favorable position, because being just slightly behind over time, just now looking at who can pump the most boss damage, which of the DKs was benefiting the most and it was cranking up their single target the most. It seems like it was on the side of Complexity Limit right now, because they are catching up in terms of boss HP and might be able to pull ahead at the last couple percentage. We'll see.
I mean, I'm eating my words right now. I said I don't really know where they're going to come back from in terms of, playing the dungeon better, but it seems like they've somehow managed to play this middle section of the dungeon in Machimba's room better than Method and A has, definitely making up a 20 seconds time difference. And you can look at the bosses now both going into single digits at the exact same times for both teams, and it looks like we're going to get a Machimba kill at the exact same time. Wow, I mean, dude, neck and neck getting into the second half of the dungeon. This is an exciting dungeon already.
You know what Max would say if he was here right now?
What would he say?
Pew, 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 and have his little finger guns out. Come on. Counting them out. Good talk. We should do this more often. Next poll coming up, as we're going to be watching both these teams pretty much doing it in unison as the Great Heroic Leap comes out. Big Spell Reflect onto the casters to grab everything in together. And hey, it's the same thing. Are we watching the same team?
Deja vu all over again as both teams go for the same line of sight around the corner. Although it looks like the damage focus for Method and A is slightly better here. As their trash pack looks like it's going to go down quite a bit faster for them, whereas looks like Complexity Limit is going to have to kite this pull out a little bit because of that Necrotic. So yeah, a little bit of problems. The pull's going to last probably 15 seconds longer for Complexity Limit, and that kind of advantage that they re-secured for themselves in Machimba's room is getting lost here as Method and A is already in the third boss's room.
Method and A, okay, while we talked about Complexity Limit playing extremely well in Machimba's room, Method and A just decimated that trash pack. I like that they weren't really worrying about the caster mob either. They just ended up using Revival to dispel all the poisons. They're already at Kula the Butcher at this point, and I love that strategy of taking advantage of the pseudo super shroud, you could call it. Having one player running downstairs, activating the obelisk, and then having the rest of the group use that, rest of the group pull the boss. That way they'll be able to bring everybody out.
Yeah, both teams opting for that strategy. We saw Method and A going for that strategy yesterday, and it was the first time that we saw it run, and we see Complexity Limit doing the exact same thing here. Surprise, surprise, players from the same guild using the same strats. But again, I mean, both teams, even though we saw a little bit of difficulty in finishing off that pull on the platform, the single target damage from Complexity Limit here already kind of catching them up a little bit. Kula the Butcher was at around 45-50% when Complexity Limit engaged, so they were about 50% boss HP behind. Kula down to 30% by the time it goes down for Method and A, so Complexity Limit catching up just a little bit here in this first part of the council boss.
That's right, there's a long encounter, and so it's just going to be boss damage, boss damage, boss damage, as both of these teams are taking on the Council of Tribes. Kula the Butcher going down for Complexity Limit, still around that 40-50% HP difference between the teams as we speak. Yeah, about 50% right now, as overall they've done a great job positioning the axes from Kula on both sides, so they're able just to occupy the middle of the room, and all those axes should be outside of the room's area at this point. I guess we'll be looking to see how each team will be able to handle Aka Ali at the very end, using Feigned Deaths, maybe even Transcend or something along those lines. Probably not Transcend, but probably the Feigned Deaths to make sure their tanks will still be able to pump extra damage, even though they might have the Tank Buster debuff.
Yeah, with how close this matchup is, that might actually end up coming into account. Of course, we're talking about that resetting the boss's mechanics or resetting the boss's cast sequence sort of ability that we saw that was premiered in the China region last year, where if you feign death enough of those charge fixates from the boss, he'll end up doing the debilitating backhand on the tank and then just continuing to barrel through afterwards. And if you're able to pull that off, your tank can stay in for the entire duration of the ability. First barrel through cast, feign death by Lip Hunt. Second one goes on Yoda here, which he will feign at the end of that cast. Then he should do the debilitating backhand right afterwards, but it doesn't matter, because on another hunter he'll be able to feign death this one off as well, and they'll be able to have their tank stay in for maximum damage. Oh, feign death didn't come off, so not ideal for them. Not ideal.
It was close to coming back off at that point, but hey, Lighty's a god, and he just ends up parrying it anyway. So these things happen.
Did he parry it or dodge it? Where's Dratnos?
He parried it. Okay, I'm making an executive decision. He parried it.
I think I'll have to check with Dratnos on that one. I'm not too sure.
We'll ask Tettles. He'll probably know.
Okay, we'll ask Tettles. Same person.
Yeah. Basically.
But the single target damage here really squaring off here. Like we mentioned, Method and A was 50% ahead on that one boss. By the time Aka Ali goes down, the boss was at 20% for Complexity Limit. These boss kills are within 10 seconds, within 5 seconds, mind you, actually, for both teams. So still, at the end of this dungeon, it's incredibly close, and that one death timer might actually end up coming into account based off how close this is.
I really think that it will. At this point, it looks like Method and A is on their usual time trial sort of setup, whereas on the side of Complexity Limit, they're saying, okay, we need to start refining some of our strategies just a little bit more so that we can start catching up to Method NA's time. And right now it looks like they're doing everything within their power to make sure that that happens, as mirror image pulls coming up back to back as we continue seeing more or less the same route coming out of both of these teams. It's just going to be coming down to group damage and execution to see who's going to take it.
Yeah, I mean, just this is absolutely as close as it gets right now. Once again, complexity limit just a few, just barely behind, 5 to 10 seconds behind. The execution and the DPS at the end of this dungeon is really going to be what makes or breaks the dungeon for both of these teams. There's not really a whole lot of dungeon left for them to make any mistakes.
Yeah, I like this move by complexity limit. They're getting all of the crowd controls up. Those are hard CCs, they're not true CCs, so the hunters get aggro. They're going to need to feign death so they can drop the aggro that's on those mobs, and then they'll be able to move forward. It's not as fast as we're seeing as Method NA doing their skip, but again, it's just going to come down to that boss damage at the very end and how well these teams are going to execute on 3 obelisks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be scary, right? We know how difficult that multiple obelisk with the final boss is, especially in this dungeon in King's Rest. King Dazar can put out a lot of tank damage at the same time as the other awakened mobs. So, if one of those blade combos goes off and your tank isn't properly prepared for it, or if you don't have a monk bubble for it, they could just go down. Both teams, however, do have multiple battle reses available and multiple misdirects in order to regain aggro on the tanks. But like we mentioned earlier, one death could make or break this dungeon for either team.
It's also going to be extremely difficult when neither team really is going to be able to kill Raban, outright at least. If you think about it,
yeah,
they're going to have to take that additional risk if they want to make sure that they're going to be able to bring that down. And he's getting very, very low on that one. Got to make sure they're watching out for that. What was it? I think this is on EU week back in Legion. There were a couple times where tanks just ended up dying because the healer didn't heal them.
I feel, playing with Lighty as much as I have played with him, I can guarantee you that was like a call. He's like, I will be fine with this feast to go down and get your mana. That's 100% a call that was made by him. That's just kind of the stuff that he does as a player. So just the kind of optimizations that these teams go through really lend themselves to that kind of strategy.
Yeah, no question. All right, Bloodlust going up. All the obelisks have been activated right now as this first game between Method NA and Complexity Limit in our upper finals is going to be decided by who is going to execute better, pump damage better into King Dazar and all of his surrounding minions. Shakib gets a bit of damage onto him by Raban, like we were talking about. Neither group can really afford to push any sort of damage into him. Max does get hit by the Dark Fury. Gotta be watching for that, but they do a great job of recovering. JB is excellent on mana as Twist has been burning about half of his pool at the moment. And right now, Method NA is in the driver's seat.
Yeah, definitely
very
in the driver's
narrowly.
seat. Yeah, just barely. They've just been barely ahead this entire second half of the dungeon. But what's really going to come into account, especially once Tazala comes out here, is going to be that focused single target damage from both of the teams, which we've already seen is very slightly higher from Complexity Limit. And this is going to be a complete DPS race down at the end here, as Complexity Limit is within 10% boss HP already here.
That's right. A lot of the hunters taking tons of damage to the side of Complexity, where Method NA is working on Sala as we speak. Hasn't spawned just yet on Limited side, it has right there. So at this point, they're dealing next to no damage to Raban. It's just all incidental cleave coming out. They gotta be very careful as Sala goes down for Method NA, and they are in a great position to be able to take this, but they gotta be able to stabilize the group here as Shakib's gonna get a huge Goomba Stomp of damage on him.
Yeah, that was a scary moment there. Lighty dropping below 25% HP from that blade combo, but barely being able to kept alive from JB. You can see that mana bar is now almost empty for JB. He really expended a lot of that mana here. But Tazala is now down for Complexity Limit as well, but they have a lot of work to get to make up here as King Dazar is below 30% for Method NA, and that's just a massive amount of HP difference between the two teams. And I don't think at this point Complexity Limit's going to be able to make it up. But man, I mean, what a first dungeon from these two teams. This is an absolute banger between the two.
Yeah, and it's great to see how close these players are, in relation to each other. Method NA did have such quicker movement throughout the dungeon, though, and I think it really became apparent with how well they were able to just optimize their movement throughout. But Complexity Limit really improving on their time trial runs, improving their performance throughout the entirety of the tournament. So, Method NA, game 1 to them.
Yep, that's going to put them one game away from sending Complexity Limit down to the lower bracket. This is an upper bracket match, so don't worry just yet. But yeah, well played by them. No deaths on the side of Method NA. 2 deaths on the side of Complexity Limit. But where Where was the difference, Tuttles? I mean, it seemed like those were both very solid runs for both teams, but where was it that we saw Complexity Limit fall short and just not able to pull off a win there?
Well, I mean, they did mirrored pulls, so basically the time differential came in like the first room area. And the reason for that is because of just like keeping the mobs grouped up for even like 2 or 3 seconds longer is such a large time save on that first room pull because of how the Witch Doctors and the champions end up functioning, especially with compositions like Double Hunter and a DK, like you really want everything stacked. I'm not convinced that Method NA played that route in their time trial time, by the way. I think that they may have played the 5-pack into the council fight, but like something like that is not going to be super consistent in a necrotic environment, so that they would have to change it up for live runs. But I'm not convinced that they played that for time trials.
I agree with you completely. I think something that's definitely a possibility is they had a good idea of what they were doing in King's Rest already, saw what Method NA ran yesterday, maybe ran a few practice routes of it today or last night and figured out that it was something they could also reproduce, and that's something that we could have seen here today.
Oh, I was talking about Method NA. I don't believe that Method NA ran that.
You don't think they ran that route?
No,
Sorry.
I believe that Method NA...
Complexity Limit.
I believe that Method NA played something more aggressive into the third boss. I think they probably played a bunch of trash with it.
Yeah,
and
I think
that's
you're right, too.
probably where the difference of the 50
difference.
seconds is. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like a minute difference.
It could have been the fourth obelisk, too.
It could have also been the fourth obelisk.
Maybe.
That's a great point, but like getting Lighty through because he has Dwarf Racial, maybe it was the fourth obelisk? You could be spot on with that.
I feel like Tettles is on the right on this one, at least. The consistency or the extra damage that they could really be doing to start killing off all those trash packs that they took extra time with to kill upstairs, I feel like that'd be much more well worth it. And we've seen teams try to do that already in other games.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll have to see if they can continue with that clean playstyle from Method NA for the next game, and if Complexity Limit can maybe make up some time there. Tettles, what did you Zyro, what did you want to make? Wait, no, I'm getting so lost. Tettles, break it down for us.
I mean, basically we saw mirrored runs, which the route that both of these teams are using is spectacular, and that's why they were so close through the whole entire thing. It was just like minor problems for Complexity Limit, like the first room. That just set them behind for the rest of the whole entire dungeon, especially since they are playing what is a mirrored route. Like you have to be able to be... Both of the teams were consistent, which is great. So one slip up would have cost one team or the other team like the whole entire run. So seeing these two teams be so neck and neck, like Zyro said, certified banger for sure. That was a great run, and I hope that they're able to continue on with just as close of a match going into the rest of this series.
And if your Complexity Limit, also, I believe they shaved, or they only were 3 seconds slower than their time trial run. I think they had 19 minutes on King's Rest. If you played that close to your time trial run, Jack, and you're up against Method NA, is that discouraging?
I think that's a really good, big confidence boost that you're at that level of play that you're able to, almost meet your time trial run. I think they could have gotten 30, 40 seconds faster very easily if they didn't have the early death. For example, they could start shaving off a lot of seconds, especially if they go back, watch the VOD. They can start saying, oh, Method NA had stronger movement. They were a little bit faster at a couple of these different points. Let's start breaking down how we can do that so we can meet their time level. And I think that's really where Complexity Limit is as a team, that they might need to make some small micro adjustments in the most nitpicky way possible, right? To shave off a little bit of extra time, but their execution throughout the rest of the dungeon was phenomenal. And I think that should be just more of a sign that they're all in sync together, and that should be more of a, a shot in the arm for them as they go to Waycrest.
How do you feel about them playing a mirrored route?
I think that's probably
weird how that happens, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, let Zyro take this one.
Do you think that that's like the optimal route? Like, do you think what we saw for that King's Rest was optimal given the fixes?
Yeah, well, I think 4 obelisk is optimal, which I do have confirmation that was a time trial route now. They did 4 obelisk in time trials.
Okay.
But
that's okay.
But I think that is probably about as optimal as it gets, right? Like it's insanely good. It's I don't really know. King's Rest is one of the dungeons that we've seen so many more optimizations going through pretty much like the entire past year and a half, and it's always been one of the dungeons that we thought, you know, they could be doing this better, they could be doing the bridge better, and we didn't really see it actually get optimized until the second half of the season last year. But I think they've got it completely nailed out down. I remember at the start of last year, like 25-minute King's Rests were like really fast for us.
Yes,
And now we're down to like
that.
17 minutes, 18 minutes is ridiculously fast.
Yeah, there was definitely both fast King's Rest for this team. Now we're moving on to Waycrest. Those affixes are Explosive and Grievous. Method and A up 1-0 against Complexity Limit.
All right, diving into Waycrest, and what is this? They're doing mirror routes? What? Is ironic?
I'm just shocked and or appalled, Jack.
Oh, okay, maybe not quite. Let's see. What do they got going on? They're grabbing some things from outside. Are they grabbing all of the...
Ooh, this
all
is
right.
even bigger for Method and A,
That's
actually.
right.
They put the hallway patrol in as well. But
Look at Soletta.
Wait,
Zoletta's at
Selena?
30%.
Oh, wow.
What? And they still got the mind
Absolutely
control. What?
What is going on?
How?
But here's the difference. Method and A is committing their bloodlust to this, and Complexity Limit, like we normally know from them, they save their bloodlust for the courtyard pull. But I still feel like I don't really like what Complexity Limit does in the courtyard. We know you can go bigger. We know that we've seen other teams pull that courtyard pull into Soulbound Goliath as well. And seeing as how they have that bloodlust available, we know that they kind of looked at the King's Rest strat from Method and maybe added some stuff to their times from that. Maybe they went with what Ethical went yesterday. They saw Ethical do that and said, hey, maybe we can pull that off. I'm interested to see if they've made another adaptation here on the fly.
We're going to have to see, as both teams are just chunking through any of each of these Heartsbane Triad bosses at this point. And even though it did look like a very big pull, there's really not that much trash that was grabbed in with both of them. It wasn't very heavy percent, so I see what you mean. There's not a huge gain on this one, especially because it's a fortified dungeon instead of a tyrannical, so I'd like to see that courtyard. I mean, we've been talking about it for a while. We're seeing how Method and A is moving themselves towards the door to make sure they're going to be able to get in prime position for this next round, and this is going to be good. This is going to be good out of both teams right now.
I think this is kind of the make or break point of the dungeon. If both of these teams are playing at their best, which it seems like they are playing right now after that King's Rest, this courtyard is going to be where we see a make or break. Of course, Method and A did finish off the boss about 10 seconds earlier. They committed their bloodlust. Lighty pulling absolutely everything in that courtyard into Soulbound Goliath. They don't have bloodlust available, so Explosive is going to be the key here. You can see 4 of them are about to go off here. Lots of damage on the group, and this is where the Unholy DKs are absolutely going to pop off.
So speaking of Unholy DKs, look at JV almost doing 400k healing at one point. Complexity Limit, however, is just not going as big. You talked about it. So here's the weirdest thing in my mind. Method and A used Bloodlust on the very first boss in the dungeon and didn't pull in a crazy amount of trash. They pulled in a good amount, but not a crazy amount. They go into the courtyard, pull everything possible. Every single possible iteration of the trash. They have a empowered matron, and they didn't use Bloodlust on this. JB goes down, Lighty's extraordinarily low, he can't get away. He goes down as well. I don't understand why they didn't use Bloodlust on this with all the threat. I mean, Soul Fetish went off, caused a ton of problems. The Goliath is just going to kick everybody into the dust. Complexity Limit, even though I'm not as big of a fan as what they've done either, I think, like you mentioned, they could go bigger. You know, they're in the lead right now, certainly.
That's such a scary pull. I mean, in general, that courtyard pull is so scary, and I can see why they wouldn't go for the Soulbound Goliath pull, even if they do save their bloodlust. You can see how dangerous that is. If one of those explosive goes off, your entire group starts stacking Grievious.
Yeah.
Your healer is already in a hole from the healing they have to put out through explosive, but Grievious makes it worse and worse and worse. And as you saw there, when Lighty was about to go down, he was already at a 4-second Grievous with the healer dead, and there's not a whole lot he can do when he's already taken that damage. Of course, we know warriors are more of a preventative tank rather than a self-healing tank. So if they're already in that Grievous range, the best they can do is put absorbs on themselves, right? There's not a whole lot else they can do other than that, and you can see he was trying his hardest at the end there to stay alive, but with his healer dead, there's just not a whole lot you can do. So that's unfortunately a full team wipe, and you can see that Soul Fetish is still on Matron Brindle, so he's going to be absolutely slapping the tank.
And onto the construct as well. So you're having some extraordinarily buffed mobs that you can't bring in with anybody else. Complexity Limit's grabbing mobs outside, bringing them on top of the matron as we speak. And they are going to end up pulling the boss right now. So big way of the crane for Twisted here, as he's going to be stabilizing the group. And this is always one of the most challenging things from the Mistweaver's point of view. Once you stabilize with way of the crane, you need to make sure that you're going to be able to sustain the tank, especially in a dungeon like this with heavy pressure, and make sure that you're going to not burn up too much mana in the process. So you're seeing Twisted right now has tons of mana at his disposal with a great use of Mana Tea preemptively, reducing the cost of his Way of the Crane. And now he's got full mana in time for the boss fight, as they're going to have to deal with some of the chip damage from any of the maggot spits that will go out onto the DPS.
Yeah, and I think you can just see what you just mentioned it yourself, how ridiculous that Way of the Crane is. They had like 8 or 9 spit debuffs split across the entire group, and nobody was even close to dipping into Grievious range, just absolutely topping everyone off as quickly as possible. Just the power of that cooldown. Even after the flames go out on the group, the only people that are still in Grievious range are the tank, of course, and Twisted himself, and he's not worried about himself too much. Max
Just a minute.
take a bit of damage, but
he does. Just a minute after that pull, almost exactly, we are seeing more trash getting pulled into the room. They're just waiting for Way of the Crane to be able to use it once again. And just look at those health bars. You're seeing, okay, they're quickly getting top, when there's almost 100k HPS over a minute into the pull. Lighty's getting clobbered right now, but they do a great job getting Cocoon onto him. They still have the statue, which I love the pick in this dungeon to make sure they're stabilizing him. Now Lighty's got access to Last Stand, Shield Wall. He's in a prime position as Max is getting some of his cooldowns back, but he's got a ton of rage, and they are taking down some of the remaining trash on the side of Complexity Limit side to deal with Goliath first.
Somehow Method in A is absolutely trucking Soulbound Goliath. They've almost caught up to Complexity Limit here. It must be just the amount of trash that they've been pulling into Soulbound Goliath. Complexity Limit is kind of they haven't pulled too much trash into the boss. They've opted to pull more of those the captain room into the trash, whereas Method in A has more gone for the roll side as well. But Lighty goes down again with the boss at 10% HP. There's no battle res. I don't know if they might be able to pull this off with the parry from Yoda, but it doesn't look like he has aggro right now, so I'm not really sure what they're going to be able to do. Shakib maybe could Shadow Meld off at the last second here and give aggro to Yoda, but if he doesn't have parry available, there's no way they're going to be able to get through this. They just have to kite this out somehow.
Oh, he gets Soul Thorned, and he gets taken down. Yoda, 2% left on the boss. He's running for his very life. The rest of the group can't release. Don't go into the fire!
Shoot your pistol, Yoda!
That is so
100%.
close right now. He's just going to be doing anything he can. Another speed pot goes up. Oh my
the
goodness.
Pistol shots are able to finish it off. Wow, what a heads-up play from Yoda. Just barely able to keep his team alive.
And on the other side, Eric goes down in a massive raw pull as they grab everything in the room. Eric, however, does get all of his damage off before he ends up dying, but tons of pressure onto the group right now. Twisted, I think, is outside of Way of the Crane. He is standing in a little bit of bad. He's got to make sure he watches his feet. Max is taking a ton of pressure. There's no Way of the Crane available. All defenses are up. Got to make sure he takes advantage of that Fortifying Brew if he's not going to be able to top himself. I like that quick Essence spot. Make sure he gets the cancel very rapidly, and he's going to stabilize right now.
Did you notice Twisted had a 13 stack of Eye of Corruption? He was sitting in Eye of Corruption, and that was one of the major influences of the damage he was taking, but able to heal the team through that and stabilize. Scary moment from them, but able to just barely get through it, even with the death from one of your DKs on that massive AoE. And we're seeing the exact same pull from Method in A, just now pulling all that trash into the boss. Lots of explosive orbs. Yoda's going to have to stabilize them here.
No, JB's going to have to stabilize them right now on this one. They're letting those explosive orbs go off. As long as they're not getting one shot by him, the massive healing from Way of the Crane will be able to help them deal with it. And at that point, this is the difference right now. Watching Method NA, they neutralize the threat because both of their DKs lived to completion. And that makes it so much easier for the entirety of the group to survive. And that's where you're going to start seeing JB start pumping a ton of damage. Whereas on the side of Twisted, he had to work to stabilize the group because the DPS died. He had to spend additional uptime, additional work to make sure he was able to stabilize his group. And yes, he stood in the eye a bunch, but that's what he had to do at that point in time. He needed to be able to sit still, force himself to take more damage because he knew that he wasn't going to take it from other sources, unlike the tank who was just getting clobbered. So great plays, great presence of mind by these healers to make sure they're having the sacrifices that they need to make when they need to.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell it was calculated as well. Obviously, every single time you get one of those Eye of Corruption procs, it does 8 ticks of damage. So if he hopped out of it at like 13 stacks here, he was like in the 10 to 13 range. He had to like dodge some of them, right? You don't just only take 13. So calculated as well to make sure that he wouldn't go down. Once again, good play from Twisted there. Heads up, make sure it doesn't go down to a corruption effect. That would be pretty unfortunate to see.
We did see a little bit of bit of deaths from Thing from Beyond, but that's why healers don't run Thing from Beyond.
Yeah, typically.
That's why we don't.
Yeah.
Because you look at those situations where you say, okay, I won't heal myself, I need to deal damage, or I need to heal other people, and then you have that Thing from Beyond just like, hello.
I think From Beyond is such a Grand Illusion is such a ridiculous ability sometimes. You know, sometimes you're fighting Mythic N'Zoth and 3 things from Beyond spawn when you're transitioning to the Psychus phase, and you just die. You know, I can't say I've ever personally seen that happen, but you know, maybe it's happened to somebody on stream or something.
The Titanic theme just plays.
Both teams looking like they're dealing with that Urgroth Big Breaker of Heroes mob at the exact same time. You know, actually, no, only Method NA is dealing with Urgroth Breaker of Heroes.
You think every Faceless one looks the same, man?
They do. They kind of do. Of course,
see some tentacles and
yeah, Complexity Limit wasn't dealing with the Breaker of Heroes. They were dealing with the Fear guy instead. So differences in pulls, of course, here, as Complexity Limit once again pulls the entire room into Lord and Lady Waycrest, of course, making use of that Unholy DK AoE that we keep talking about, and they're just going to absolutely truck Lord Waycrest here.
That's right, and no Bloodlust as well. They're going to be holding on, or they won't have it until the very last boss. They're doing a great job just burning Waycrest's HP away. He does get his first top off as we speak. Most of the trash has been neutralized, and this is kind of what I want to see, is how well they're finishing the fight on this one. I've seen a number of times where Complexity Limits had done a great job executing the pulls and setting them up, but they've also let trash linger a little longer than I think it should. And that's been causing a little bit of issues with some of the casts going through, additional pressure on the group. And there we go. I'm glad that they ended up cleaning that up. And good positioning by the full melee group to get out of the way of each other for the debuff, as Method NA pulls the entirety of the basement.
Yeah, and this is just a difference in terms of trash count, right? We didn't see Complexity Limit do this. We're actually seeing different strategies from both teams. What? What is going on? That's not possible. They're running different strategies. Yeah, I mean, this is something that we've seen in previous weeks as well. A lot of teams, when they're running this double Unholy DK comp, are going to go for this specific thing, right?
Oh, Lighty does go down.
Going down. They have a Battle Res available for him, but I'm not sure they're going to use it with only Matron alive at 10% HP. Again, good heads-up call there.
I wonder if he wasn't able to spell reflect the debuff that the Matron will put out. It's like a 10-15% damage taken increase that went out, and if you have all this other trash going on all at the same time, there might be something else that could intercept the spell reflect.
Potentially, yeah. It's weird to see. Yeah. I think you're right. I think there's something that went wrong there with, maybe he said he was fine with spell reflect and just.
I think he had Shield Wall at his disposal, but I see it's back now, but I don't remember if he actually had it beforehand. So it very well could have been something where usually you do spell reflect it so that you can just clobber that Matron, who's not going to be a big deal if you have it at your disposal. But on the other hand, if you start getting hit by it, all the mobs are hitting you for full damage, you will just drop instantly. And Complexity Limit just dealt with Lord and Lady Waycrest, and we saw what we looked at the other day where they were just using Spell Reflect on a Lord Waycrest to their advantage, making sure that almost every single cast from Lord Waycrest was being reflected.
And here it comes, the dangerous pull from Complexity Limit that we know that they're going to pull off here. Gloom Horrors into the final boss with 2 awakened mobs. The Gloom Horrors are down, of course, Atrocity using that Cloak of Shadows to make sure he doesn't take any damage from the jumps, and they are now into the boss. Bloodlust is popped. The Unholy DKs are going to have to deal with these Gloom Horrors before they can get another set of jumps off, but of course Twisted is baiting on top of those candles, so he's not going to be in too much danger as well. Those Gloom Horrors are just engines for the Unholy DKs here.
That's right, Twisted's got to get down right now as he's getting out of range of those mobs. He does pop Diffuse Magic, so he can mitigate a little bit of that damage, but great presence of mind to be able to get in there, spin for as much as damage as he possibly can, while ensuring that none of the jumps go off. And this is what I'm talking about, finishing off those mobs quickly to make sure that the pressure on the tank, on the group, gets relieved as rapidly as possible. Complexity Limit crushing Gorok Tool right now as Method NA still working on the Waycrests.
Yeah, I mean, this has been an impressive run, pulling it back together for Complexity Limit here. Only 1 death on the board, of course, that 1 death being from Eric on Raw. So just, one of the DKs dying on an AoE pull where it shouldn't be that big of an issue. 1 DK definitely can deal with that on their own. But yeah, just pulling it together. We've seen them have issues in this Waycrest Manor. Of course, 2 weeks ago as well, they had an issue in the courtyard, as well as on this final pull the boss that we're seeing them pull off cleanly here. And of course, some issues yesterday as well. Just forgetting to pop the Bloodlust and not making that courtyard pull go wrong. So being able to see them pull it all together in the highest form of competition against what is probably the best team in the tournament in Method NA, I feel like they're really rising to the occasion here. They're definitely playing to their opponent. It seems like that because it happened 2 weeks ago as well. They played their best matches against Method NA in that upper finals, and they're doing it again here.
That's right. Complexity Limit going to be taking game number 2 and improving over their time from yesterday by over 30 seconds, almost 40 seconds right now. Complexity Limit's looking hot today, but Method NA, despite that big wipe, they were fighting to stay in this match throughout.
Yeah. I mean,
That's right.
insanely fast.
You're muted.
Hold on. I'm sorry. I muted all my...
Whenever she's able to get back. Let me tell you, Teddles.
I'm back. Sorry.
Hello.
I had both muted. I was like frantically pulling up Windows. I was making ramen. I'm sorry. I didn't want to bother anyone. All right, I'm back. Anyways, yes, very well done on the side of Complexity Limit is what I was saying. And, you know, we saw them play Complexity Limit against BDG, and they pulled off that last minute victory, and it just seems like every time we see them on Waycrest Manor, they're really improving. And that was like a very clean run from them, Tuttles, and I really hope this continues for them.
They played it versus Ethical too, didn't they? In the second match? Yeah. So they've played Waycrest Manor all 3 matches in this tournament so far, which is what you really hope for, and is what you really hope to see, just purely because like the more practice and like the more focus you can have into like 1 or 2 specific dungeons, just like the better execution you'll end up having. And I think that's what we saw from Complexity Limit at the end there. Dude, those Gloom Horrors into Gorak Tool are such a dangerous pull too, because Twisted has to be on that snap spot to where the dogs don't jump, meaning he can't be in melee to get a bunch of spinning crane kick damage off.
They mitigated that. I think they mitigated that really well by making sure they were close enough to those candles.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot that goes on in these dungeons, and I think that just the more practice and the more precise preparation that's going into these, I think that both Complexity Limit... I think that Complexity Limit looked really good. Method NA looked like they were playing a route very similar to Ethical, which was kind of interesting. I really wish it kind of worked out, because I wanted to see the differences between the two.
Yeah, I did as well, and it's definitely not fun when you see a team like Method NA have a run like that. However, hopefully they can pull it together for this next run. However, Teddles, what did you want to break down from that last game?
All right, so originally what went wrong for Method NA was the Soul Fetish cast went off, and then they had a Thorn Guard and the Matron for Method NA with the 5 buff. That, whenever those bosses roll the 5 buff, your tank and your healer are probably going to perish very quickly. That causes a full wipe. Then they have more troubles on Soulbound Goliath. Yoda ends up kiting the boss around, bringing out his chainsaw to be able to nick away at the very last end of that tree. Complexity Limit very much in the driver's seat at that point. Sure, they may have had like a minor mistake on Raw with Eric going down, but dude, they were hard chilling. They just maintained, kept playing their match, pull straight into Gorak Tool with all the Gloom Horrors, able to take that down easily, and then, yeah, take down map number 2 versus Method NA.
And now these two teams, they're in the position of being sent onto the lower bracket, a place that Method NA has never been. So I'm definitely excited for this next match here or this next game. We're going to be moving to Freehold. And with Freehold, I feel like the question always becomes, are they going to try and do that kiting strat, or are they going to do something else? I think last time we saw Method NA do this one, they didn't, but Complexity Limit did. How do we think this next one is going to play out, Jack?
I am ridiculously excited to see how this next one will play out. I mean, all 3 of the dungeons in this series are probably some of the best to see teams like Method NA and Complexity Limit square off. There's not crazy variance in what happens with some of the boss fights. You know, we talked earlier about like Toltagor. Oh yeah, sometimes you'll see Jess Howlis pull mobs through walls, sometimes he won't, something like that. But when it comes down to Freehold, especially, this is just going to be such an awesome game to see. I'm not convinced that there's going to be kiting on... We'll see if there's going to be kiting. I've seen some that have kited, and 100%. I've seen some great kills. Yeah, you think both sides are going to kite?
So Complexity will kite, Method NA will not.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
100%.
I thought that.
So
and I think
after all the talk of like, will they, won't they, when we've seen like Method NA perform, I think that if they have the opportunity to just to brute force and kill everything, they're going to.
Well, we can see their comp. We can see their comp a little bit in advance, and they're running double DK, which is very much conducive to not kiting.
Yeah.
And also,
something also.
I want to look at the times here from what we've seen, and we've seen both of these teams run Freehold already this week. Twice for Complexity Limit, one for Method NA. Method NA going for the zero kite strat. They had a 12:58, which sub 13, blazing fast. Complexity Limit, they did have that one. They did mess up the first round of kiting against BDG, which cost them 2 minutes. They didn't win that match. But when they pulled it off against Ethical later on, they had a 13:16, where they actually also ended up pulling a patrol that they didn't mean to pull, which cost them about 30 seconds. So that once again, I mean, we're seeing ourselves in a similar situation with Complexity Limit. The upper bound of their strategy is better. So if they pull it off cleanly, they will have a better theoretical, faster time. but it's all going to be about whether or not they can actually pull it off, because it is an insanely high-risk strategy.
That's right. We already saw on the side of Ethical, I think it was earlier, who ended up dying while doing the kite strategy, and the risk is just so high. But the payoff, though, the absolute massive payoff of not having to deal with them, seems like it's great. But what I wanted to say was the fact that we saw Method NA already fight obelisks and get a slightly faster time.
I love the fact that we're going to have two very different strategies for how teams deal with the dungeon, like Freehold. Because Freehold is so high octane as it is, because basically the time has been reduced sub 13 minutes because of how you can chain pulls together, especially with Quaking and Volcanic. I just love the fact that we have two very different strategies.
Me too, and I hope both of these runs go cleanly for these two teams. I would love to see them both pull off this run, and it is tied up, one game away from moving on in the bracket and one team being sent down to the lower bracket. Method NA 1-1 complexity limit.
All right, here it comes, the deciding match to see who's going to be able to have that heap of time, ton of time to be able to chill in that grand final slot, and who gets dropped down and have to battle their way past Ethical once again to be able to compete in the grand finals. Complexity Limit, Method NA have both been killer throughout the series. They're both doing pretty similar strats that we've seen pretty much everybody do throughout the opener.
Yeah, I mean, looks like the same pulls coming out from both teams here. They're both going to be going for, bigger pull coming from Method NA. We know Limit goes for 25% here from the run earlier in the week, but Method NA just going for 31%, pulling everything. 2 extra packs, so nice and easy for them. Both teams killing it at about the same time, and just engaging Skycap and Crab at the same time. So, once again, neck and neck here with just a little bit of a trash advantage towards Method NA.
Sky Captain Crag being equal HP between both of the teams right now as we're going on, and both bosses get dismounted. Will be interesting to see. Okay, I was looking to see if JB is going to be doing any sort of baiting at the moment. It looks like he's not, and I really like this because even though Complexity Limit has Eric out to be able to take care of all the baits, missing out on healer DPS, especially on a boss fight like this, just cannot do. The game is just going to be too tight between both of these teams that you can't afford to just have your Mistweaver sitting out there spamming a little bit of Crackling Jade Lightning for 8k DPS or something like that. I'd really like that, taking a bit of extra risk on top of it, but they're moving around so much that it shouldn't be too much of an issue there.
Yeah, absolutely here. And we're seeing, just how ridiculously close the single target damage is, of course, with a slight advantage towards Complexity Limit running that Hunter instead of the second DK. Of course, DK is kind of, it's not great on single target if they don't have Army of the Dead available, so there is going to be a slight single target advantage towards Complexity Limit. Now, of course, they are definitely both just completely tailored toward their strategies, right? We know since Method NA likes going for that obelisk strategy where they don't kite them, they're much better suited to completely cleave those awakened mobs down on top of the boss, because they do also pull in that middle pack with the boss as well. So the double Unholy Decay AoE is really just going to truck all of the awakened mobs as well as the boss, whereas Complexity Limit really just wants more single target damage because that's all they're going to be doing on the final boss. So just tailor-made comps for the strategies they're running.
That's right, Complexity Limit does finish first. They had a slightly less trash taken care of from the very beginning on that end. So we're going to be watching for each group grabbing, of course, the Enforcer, bringing it on over, as probably going to be having the Shadow Melds coming up to be able to skip past it. And you're seeing Lighty getting a little bit slowed onto that one, but he does make it through. And this is where we've seen both teams really step it up. And I'm looking to see how well Complexity Limit is going to do on the Council of Captains. So we saw earlier, out of Ethical in particular, where they had their Hunter sitting up on top of the building on this one, allowing the baits for Jolly's blades to come out. Really like seeing that out of them. And I think it made sure that the bosses were staying stacked for a longer period of time. But on this one, I think we're going to get the misdirect out of Eric, and he's going to start bringing everything into max, so he'll have an easier time of grabbing all of that trash and pummeling it into the Council of Captains.
Yep, gotta keep an eye on those harpooners here. Of course, random players will get pulled into the harpooners, and if there's one of those little blitzes going on, those barrages from the scrappers going on, you can absolutely get trucked. But once everything is on top of the boss, you're going to see the massive bursts of AoE damage come out. Of course, Hunter popping up to the top for a second there, but make way for the Unholy DKs as they start doing absolutely ridiculous amounts of damage, decimating the trash for both teams.
Oh, without a doubt. Right now, it's going to be looking at, again, that boss damage race. Twist is dropping a little bit low, but he's stabilizing himself and getting back into the fight. Curious to see how much the blade is going to start reducing the group's damage, as Jolly can be such a pain to deal with especially when the blades are just taking up a ton of space. We do see the Crusher getting pulled in on the side of Method NA, weaving in a little bit more trash at this point, and I really like that a lot, because you're dropping down to 3 mobs, you know, you have a little bit of trash left remaining, and you're pretty much cleaving everything down, and you also have benefit of the good brews, but I don't know if the bad brews would work on trash. Do you know that?
They do. They absolutely do work on trash, yeah. So
well, there you go. I think it probably all takes one.
Yeah.
Probably just takes one with a Crusher of that size and makes it just a lot easier to be able to bring everything down, because, you know, he's super easy to make sure you get into that same position as, yep, every single time. It looks like they're getting even more bad bruises. They're not bothering to move any of them, and you're gonna see the Crusher just immediately go down.
Yeah, I mean, the bosses are gonna go down at the same time. I think in terms of the RNG portion of the brews, of course, there are 3 different brews. There's the bad brew, which if whatever it hits, it does percentage health damage to. So of course you want the bosses to both get hit by that. That's the one that you want the most of, especially when you're pulling trash on top of the boss, because 1 or 2 bad brews will just absolutely truck the trash pack. But of course the buffs are good as well. You know, you get crit and haste buffs from the brews on top of that. So all of them are good, you know, but you want the bad brews as much as possible just because of the actual potential. But unfortunately, problems for complexity limit here as I'm Fired Up goes down during this trash skip. I'm not really sure where his body is.
It's close enough for them to get the res off, so Twist is very low on HP, and they're waiting to spawn Ludwig as we speak, so the grand scheme of things, they're losing a bit of time, but as long as they're able to get everything in onto Ludwig, they can start making up that time right now. Grabs Crusher, grabs the full extent of the pack as they start working on it. Method NA's got their head start, though, and we both know how short this dungeon can be, so every second's going to count.
Yeah, really the health bar that really counts here in terms of dungeon progression here is going to be, like you mentioned, the health bar of Ludwig there. Of course, their progression to the rest of the dungeon, meaning killing Trothak and then moving on to the final boss, is going to be the timer to look forward to. So actually, Complexity Limit could opt to single target Ludwig down to spawn Trothak quicker, knowing that they kind of sat there doing nothing for a while, resing Fired Up. Unfortunately, while I was talking, we did see Shakib go down for Method NA, so that is going to be their only remaining battle res used. They won't have another one that's available for about 3.5 minutes, whereas Complexity Limit still has theirs, so a little bit of an advantage to Complexity Limit in that aspect, but right now they're still about 30% or so behind on Ludwig in this fortified setting, so a decent amount of HP to kind of whittle through for them here.
They do, and I'm interested to see how Method NA is going to start reducing their downtime as they immediately start grabbing some of the neutral mobs, killing them off very quickly for some free percentage, as now they have to wait for the presentation of the great Trothak Shark Puncher, as we are seeing Lighty running around, grabbing all those mobs, clearing the road of pretty much everything that he can find, grabbing it all, getting it into position as Trothak is about to spawn. And I'm always most terrified of these early pulls right there, because you're seeing all the harpoons going out onto the tank. They cannot pull the boss until they are confident that the harpooners are not dragging anybody out of the room. They grab everything together, make sure everybody's got cooldowns rolling. Now they're activating Trothak. Great play there by Lighty.
Yeah, Trothak pulled at about 3 minutes and 8 seconds on the Bloodlust timer here. We'll see when it's pulled for Complexity Limit. It's already 10 seconds behind for them, so they have a lot of time to make up here. But what I do like about both teams is they're doing a fantastic job of keeping the trash alive as much as possible before the boss is pulled, and then letting their DKs unleash all of those sores, those bursting sores onto the boss so that their DK can pop off and damage. And you're seeing it for both teams. Both DKs for Method NA easily over 1 million DPS, just now dropping below that, whereas Fired Up also popping up to about 1 million DPS as well on their side, and you can see the advantage it has for both teams. Trothak below 70%, just about like right after you pulled him. This is just what we keep seeing. This is why Unholy DK is like the premier MDI class for this style of dungeon. They're just so good at turning AoE damage into boss damage.
Each time I start looking at Complexity Limit, looking at how they've fallen behind just a little bit, their ability to pump more into the bosses, and even though we're in a fortified scenario, how well they're able to decimate boss HP to start forcing the next transition, forcing the next boss, getting into the next pull a little bit more rapidly, cannot be understated at this point. They're dead even in deaths. They're almost dead even in terms of boss percentage as we speak. And it looks like Complexity Limit might even just pull through right now because JB has to start kiting around those sharks to take them off the DPS. And that's just going to start giving a little bit more of an edge to Complexity Limit.
Yes, it's something that I've noticed ever so slightly throughout this entire series, and it hasn't been that big of a deal, but one of the things that's been very consistent throughout every single boss is Twisted is just putting out a little bit more damage on every single boss, 10-20% more damage, which for a healer only amounts to like 5 to 7k more DPS, but it adds up over the course of the dungeon. I think that's part of the reason that we're seeing Complexity Limit kind of edge their way back in on boss kills. They have just that little bit of extra boss DPS that really lets them back in the dungeon here. But you can see the major difference right now. Throthat going down at the same time for both teams, but Complexity Limit still has this major trash pool to deal with. This is going to be the remaining difference of their trash percentage. Of course, both teams are going to top off their percentage with those Ravagers for the final amount, but you can see Complexity Limit still having to deal with this is going to set them pretty significantly behind.
It will end in this one, but we also have to look at the timing. I think that there was not a favorable patrol at this point. They had to wait just a little bit of extra time, so be interested to look at... Yeah?
Wait. Isn't this going to put Method and 100%? Are they going to kite?
Well, I think they are going to kite, because they already cleared the road. They cleared the road, they're grabbing this pack early, and usually there's no need to do that whatsoever. They're at 100% in terms of trash percentage, and we're going to see JB go off to the left against those docks to grab those mobs. So yeah, when I saw the Transcend getting put down as well instead of JB, I was like, oh, here we go. Expecting Twisted to drop his Transcend in a sec here as he's on the bridge too.
We haven't seen Method and A do this.
I'm excited.
I'm excited to see this. They have not pulled this out in tournament play yet. They have to have been saving it, right? They pulled this out early in the tournament against another team, so they've just been saving this in the back pocket for a team that they thought they really needed to use it against, pulling it out against Complexity Limit, and the Bloodlust is now popped for Method and A, as we can see JB pulling all his Awakened mobs off to the bridge, and he's off to the races.
That's right. We're going to have all eyes on JB from their point of view. And same thing with Twisted. When he starts kiting right now, it's so important. All of the fight really is in their hands. And I want to be able to see how well they can handle it, because we've seen successes and failures of both sides. And I do want to see some of these healers taking a bit more damage to guarantee that they're going to be able to maintain healing threat, maintain healing aggro. Twisted going down. They do get the battle res out onto him, and he'll be able to res max, but more extra time burnt through. And right now, Twisted will not have his Transcend, so we really need to watch Twisted closely as he's going to work to pull this off. If he doesn't have his Transcend, and if he doesn't realize that he does not have it available, that could be a very big problem for him as he works to kite this.
Yep, and of course the boss is now pulled for Complexity Limit, and they'll have to go off to the races for themselves. We'll see Twisted off screen pulling the rest of the Awakened mobs, but at this point it's just a pass-fail mechanic, right?
Yeah.
It's all on JB right now. If he is able to pull off this kiting, Method and A will secure the win. So it's all eyes on JB on that monk on J.Chi. Can you pull it off?
That's right. Twisted's very low. He wasn't able to get separation onto this one. We got to be able to see what's happening with Twisted to be able to get a better look at it. And that's what I was worried about when those extra casts start going off, when he's not able to get away as rapidly. Boss ends up resetting on the side of Complexity Limit.
Well, that's unfortunate too, but I don't think it really changes much, because if JB does somehow go down here, it will be a wipe for Method and A. So not much has changed. Method and A, it's still all on Method and A here. With Harlan Sweet now down below the 30% threshold, taking double damage, it is going to be the win for Method and A, and one of the closest series we've had the pleasure to cast, I think, in the past 4 weeks. But wow, I mean, pulling out that strategy at the last moment like this, keeping that in the back pocket, there's got to be some extra level of respect between these two teams here just to save that one.
Without a doubt, that was one of the fastest 3-game series we've ever had at this point. Extremely great execution by these teams, and unfortunate that Complexity Limit wasn't able to pull it off, but they've definitely shown they've improved over their previous week, and they're really growing a lot in this tournament.
They certainly are, and that's not the end for them.